Hello and welcome to the weekly Avalanche Center update by avalanchecenter.org. I'm Jim Frankenfield, the director, and it is April 7th. It's Good Friday, so let's see what's happened in the last week or what's come to our attention in the last week in avalanches. So first of all, a lot of videos say brought to you by or sponsored by, and we're not brought to you by anyone other than the people who donate to the project. Okay, we're a grassroots project, and this is only brought to you by me. But aside from me, the people that help us pay some of the bills by becoming a member. So for $25, you can become a member. Go to the website and check that out. There are a wide variety of benefits. You can read our book for free. You can read future books for free. You can access the incidents database. You can get some discounts. You get big discounts on any courses you take. But most of all, you support this grassroots effort to promote avalanche safety and provide reliable information. So that's who this is brought to you by, the people who subscribe to the memberships. This is new, so we haven't promoted this idea of a weekly video too much yet, but we do have a couple people watching and subscribing now, and we've kind of got the process down, I think. You can help keep this going by liking the video, sharing the video, and subscribing to the channel. And there'll be some other videos on the channel as well besides the weekly update. We have one video about our spring course, and we have a video introducing myself if you want to check out who I am and what my background is. So the channel is just YouTube and then at Avalanche Center. No dash, no space, anything. Just at Avalanche Center after the YouTube URL. And you can find us that way. We've been on Facebook for a longer time, much longer time. And one thing I've thought about doing that I just did last night, so it's brand new, is create a discussion group. I can't really find a reasonably good discussion group anywhere on Facebook. And people are asking about avalanche information. And people may have questions on groups, the Climbing Mount Hood group or the Northwest Climbers or other various groups. And a lot of times the answers they get are not really ideal. They're not from somebody with any background in the field. It's just somebody who took a course themselves and thinks they know how to answer it. Sometimes the answer is good, sometimes it's not good, and how do you know the difference? So we've created this group to have a central location for avalanche questions and discussions, and I'll definitely be monitoring and participating in it, but certainly anybody else is welcome to as well. If I make a comment or answer a question and somebody wants to disagree with that, that's fine. I just hope that we can get correct answers out there and address people's questions and have some positive discussions. This is also, and I don't know if this is going to work on today's internet, but this is an opportunity to have some communication between people with a vested interest in avalanche safety and education and science. When I started this project 25 years ago, we didn't have the web. We had something called Usenet, and it was very discussion-oriented. I got really started on this whole thing by answering questions, often technical questions, that people on Usenet were asking. For a while, we had forums. More people joined the internet. Not all of them were very civil. We had a lot of heated discussion, but we still had discussion and communication. And I just don't see that happening today. And so this group is an opportunity to participate in discussions and ask questions and answer questions and be constructive. Whether people really have any interest in that anymore remains to be seen. The internet's really just become one giant marketing tool, basically. So people are a lot more passive, and other people just throw stuff at them to convince them to buy stuff. That's kind of my take on the internet at this point, 25 years later. But maybe people will prove me wrong, and maybe we can have some constructive, good conversations on this group. We'll see. One thing I forgot to mention before that at the beginning was that you can also support us by buying things. Our store is not so active anymore, but we have logo products. So today I'm wearing my Avalanche Center shirt. On the front we have this, got my camera switched here. This is our kind of first traditional logo for people that don't like skeletons. And this is on some of our web pages. On the web page, this C actually has some surface ore underneath it and slides down. Can't do that on the shirt. Probably don't have the resolution to put the surface ore there. But that's the pocket logo. And then on the back, we have our famous skiing skeleton logo. And we inherited this back in the early days from a course program in the Tahoe area. And they weren't using the logo or teaching courses anymore. And they agreed to give us copyright to that logo. And we've used it ever since. And we have shirts, especially large size shirts. You can find those on the website. That's another way to support the site. It still has our original URL, csac.org, on it, which still works. It'll just forward to our newer URL, Avalanche Center. And I think we have a couple of Nalgene water bottles left. Those are almost out. So if you remember, you can get a discount on that shirt. We have a deal right now for members if you log in, and the shirts are a bit cheaper. Last year, we gave them out to people who successfully completed the climbers course at the end of the course. If they finished it, not everyone finishes it, not because it's all that tough, but because they don't get around to finishing it. People got a free shirt, so we distributed a few shirts that way. This year, we're not doing the same kind of deal, and on top of the deal we're already offering, I don't want to throw in a free shirt in addition, but there probably will be a chance if you finish that course to get a shirt for a much cheaper price as sort of a reward for finishing it on a certain time frame. So we have shirts and have a new Facebook group. So let's go on to incidents briefly. There's not a lot in the U.S. Fortunately, I think the last one was the 27th of March, the last one I'm aware of. The last fatal incident, anyway, that was in Utah. There probably have been incidents since then, and there have been some things happening in other countries. But yeah, that's probably, we haven't had a whole slew of incidents lately that happened in a burst, but almost every week when I've finished the video, I've ended up in the next couple of days finding another incident, getting another incident to add to the database and a spreadsheet. And this is the first week when I can say there's not really anything new. So that's good news. There's some reports coming out from, finally, the official reports for incidents earlier in the season are now coming out. We're really going to be a little bit slow on adding those to our site. You can go back to the government sites and find that. We'll mirror those on our site, and that'll happen when we have time to do it. Right now, the spring course is more of a priority, and there's only a small amount of time to work on this project. We will incorporate those official information into another season review. I think in Switzerland they have a preliminary season review. I think it's a little early to do anything even preliminary quite yet. We will have a preliminary version that will only be available online to members until the season is officially over, which will be September 30th. So the information on these incidents will be distilled into some kind of summary conclusion type publication again, but it's a little early for that. I only saw one headline or sentence or reference to the one, something in Europe and Switzerland. According to what I saw, they had a light snow year, but an average or more, or I think close to average year for fatal incidents. That's not surprising. People seem to think that more snow equals more avalanches, and that's not true over the course of a season. when you have frequent snow and time for that to settle between, and where the rate of the new snow is slow enough to allow settlement, you don't develop persistent weak layers and you don't have so many avalanche incidents. A thin snowpack develops a lot more weaknesses. You'll develop weaknesses on the surface when it's nice for a long time, surface sore, facets, and then maybe crusts sometimes. And then the next storm will come, and often it's not that big to bury those layers deeply enough to make them go away as a concern. And then you start all over on the new surface. So you end up with a lot more weak layers in a drier year. So it sounds like Europe had a dry year. Here in the Caucasus, it was an incredibly dry year. I did see they were heli skiing for a short time in March. Usually they're gone by March, but in January and February, there was hardly any snow. And I haven't really paid as much attention to Europe, but I guess they had a dry season too. There was one major incident in Sikkim, which is in India. It's kind of in between Nepal and Bhutan and Tibet, and it's worth mentioning just by the sheer magnitude of what happened. I think last I saw, 7 people were killed. They were described as tourists taking a bus up the road to the border of Tibet and China. So I guess some vehicles on the road were hit, and quite a number of other people were injured. Some of them were critically injured. So that was a really major incident. And it's a reminder, we talk a lot in the U.S. about, and Europe about recreational accidents. And we go to great length to protect people essentially from themselves. I mean, when we go out there, and I include myself in this, when we go out there to ski or climb or do anything, we're making our own decision, and we're choosing to be in that terrain. And we go to great lengths to protect people like me from ourselves, which some people ask for that, some people don't. But there are a lot of countries in the world where avalanches are a problem for people that are just on a road or in a house or tending livestock or something like that. They don't have huge investment in any kind of information or mitigation. I know in parts of India they're working on that. I don't know about Sikkim. It looks like a kind of out of the way place. And they were described as tourists, but I believe they were mostly Indian people. I don't believe they were foreign tourists. So that's update on incidents. A few comments on incidents anyway. So conditions, and I only see, what I see come across the news feeds on conditions. So I am summarizing and admittedly somewhat speculating at times. I haven't seen much about California in the news at this point. Obviously, they have record amounts of snow on the ground, but I haven't seen any more news of new snow or of avalanches occurring in recent couple of weeks, probably. What I'm seeing in the news now is Utah. Utah's had some really record-breaking avalanches. Just the other day, both Big Cottonwood and Little Cottonwood Canyon were closed. And I just saw today that an avalanche came down from outside Snowbird, Mount Superior, I believe. And it sounds like it crossed the road and came very close or onto the edge of a trail at Snowbird. So they had to close the runs and actually put everybody back in the lodges in an interlodge. I don't know if the road up and down the canyon was open. I guess I'm assuming it was, but there's supposedly some pictures of massive avalanches with older trees in them. So it's quite a avalanche cycle in Utah, and they've had a large amount of snow this year. I think earlier in the year, some of it came from these atmospheric rivers. That's probably down deeper now and dense and buried. More recently, they've had a just never-ending series of storms, as far as I can tell, of colder snow. And there's not much chance for the snow to settle, so you have a storm snow and a second storm snow layer and a third storm snow layer. And if there's not enough time for that to settle, it really builds up. And this is going to be an interesting problem in the spring, which may hit abruptly. They're saying it'll warm up very abruptly now, today, tomorrow, sometime around now. And you have all this unconsolidated, unsettled snow, and all of a sudden you warm it up, and your surface layers become more wetter. They have more water content, and the snowpack has more energy from the warming, and you can potentially have some really large avalanches when spring hits. When spring hits a winter snowpack suddenly, it's usually bad news. And I can remember one year in Canada when it was like this in May, and usually there's no problem skiing or accessing terrain near Rogers Pass on the road. But they were closing some of the closure areas to keep their options open for avalanche control in May, and there were large wet slides and deep slides because the snowpack, when it warmed, had not yet settled and consolidated. So we'll see what happens, but there may be some more large avalanches in Utah. One of the interesting things about Utah, recently they've been talking about the Salt Lake drying up and being a drought like a lot of the West and not having a lot of snow. Well, in the 80s, there were 3 years, I believe it was about 84 to 86, more or less. And those were heavy snow years. I don't know how they compare to this year, but they were very heavy snow years with very large avalanches. Some of them were 100-year avalanches or something on that order. And after 3 years of that, the lake at that time was so large, they were trying to figure out how to get the water out of it. And there were jokes about the Bangor pumps pumping it from the Great Salt Lake into the West Desert to dry it up. And here we are last year talking about no water in it. So this is just the nature of the extremes that happen in the snowpack or the water. We can talk about this year being huge and last year being bone dry, and we can talk about the lake being drying up, or we could talk about it flooding, and this just happens over time. So I don't think it's in a long time scale. It's not necessarily unusual. I don't know how this compares specifically to those years. So we have the spring melt issues coming. California certainly has a lot of snow that will need to melt. Where the places it goes to, like lakes and reservoirs, some of those are already at a healthy level. If it melts too quickly, that may fill beyond their capacity or flood. Whether streams and rivers flood or have too high a flow rate, that remains to be seen. It depends how fast the snow melts. Whether it melts fast or slow, it's got to go somewhere, and the lakes may overflow anyway. If you're into kayaking and boating, this certainly will be a factor to watch for that activity. And then we have this situation in Utah where we have unconsolidated snow, unsettled snow, and if it warms too quickly, not only will we have a lot of melting, we may have large avalanches. Even after it's settled, even later in spring, in a well-defined spring-type snowpack, if you put enough free water in it, if you don't have refreezing overnight for days or a week or more, things do get soggy, and you also have the possibility of deep avalanches. At that point, it depends a lot on whether you have melting and freezing and how long the lack of a refreeze goes on. And this is the kind of topic that we cover in our spring course. It specifically covers this spring conditions that people climbing in the spring and mountaineering need to be aware of and know. So the last thing, I've talked a little bit about education in the past couple of weeks, and there's some people doing avalanche classes and trying to start a bulletin here in Georgia. And I saw a picture of a class, and they had a snow pit about 2 meters deep. And this is the kind of thing I have kind of mixed feelings about. it takes a lot of time. It can be instructive if you have interesting layers to learn from that go down that deep. It could be instructive in terms of learning about the layers and connecting them to the weather, as long as you're familiar and your students are familiar with the weather history. Um, but we don't spend that much time digging snow pits that deep. In most people don't when they're out skiing or climbing. It's extremely time consuming, and it's not a very good indicator of what might happen. You may find a weak layer 2 meters down that you can't trigger because it's 2 meters down and you just don't have much impact at that point. Somewhere else, that layer may not exist at all, and somewhere else it may only be a couple feet deep and easy to trigger. So I think spending a lot of time in these deep snow pits is, if there's conditions make it worthwhile, I guess it's a good educational exercise. But doing that someplace like Oregon or Washington or California is probably a waste of time. I don't know why you dig that deep unless you had extremely unusual conditions. And I don't know what the conditions were here in Georgia. We have had a series of late season storms, so maybe they saw something interesting. There was an incident in Montana 2 years ago, and it was reportedly, by some reports, a guided incident. Nobody died, but they were very lucky that that was true. And they dug a snow pit 2 meters deep somewhere on their way up, and then they continued to ascend very exposed terrain. And they were grouped up because it's very hard when someone's breaking trail to maintain your distance because they're going very slow and everybody else catches up to them. So they were grouped together, and 3 of them got caught in an avalanche. I don't know what they missed in the snow pit. I don't know how it differed. They triggered the avalanche much higher up on a slope in an open area. I don't know, where they dug the snow pit, except that it was down lower before the ascent. So you really need to be careful about digging a snow pit and how much time you want to spend and how much deeply you need to dig. And I may have mentioned this previously, but on Mount Hood, when I used to do in-person classes, we saw some group up there in the spring in Oregon with a 2-meter tall roof block column beating up on it, trying to see if they could make it fail, which is really a waste of time. I don't think anybody got anything out of that. When you're climbing and you have time is a very important factor, you're really not going to stop and dig snow pits from certainly not a 2-meter deep snow pit. And if you've had a good course, you can describe and anticipate the snowpack. So another thing I saw one year on the climbing forum was some guy who just finished a level 1 course and described the conditions on the Hogsback on Mount Hood, and he described them in all his technical terms the way you would with the official observation using the guidelines and whatnot, which maybe that impresses some people with his great knowledge, but most of the people on this forum don't understand what he's talking about. And he could have explained the same thing in simple English. It wouldn't have been very hard. And if he had explained it in plain English, it would have been what I would have predicted just from watching the weather. So there's sometimes things are made overcomplicated, particularly in spring. It comes down to your weather, your energy balance, sometimes new snow. And the timing and group factors are very important. I mean, you don't want to be halfway up the slope when the sun hits on it. You need to time everything according to the weather. So that's enough for today. That's this week's update. We're going to be moving here in the next week or two, so possible that I'll miss a week. We'll see. And in probably by 2 weeks, we will have moved and I'll be in a new studio, if you could call this a studio. It is where I teach online from, as well as making these videos. So let's see what happens this week. If it warms up, be careful, especially in a place like Utah with unsettled snow. And watch out in the spring for whatever happens with the thawing season. And I don't know whether we're finished with winter or not. I do know Utah's supposed to be warming up abruptly. I don't know what's happening anywhere else. And I don't know if these conditions in Utah exist. I assume they exist other places in the West as well. The storm follows a track, and other places are on that track as well. So you can extrapolate what I talked about for Utah to other places if you are in those locations or wish to extrapolate. So till next week, bye. Remember to like, subscribe, share, and all that stuff. Think about getting a membership or buying a shirt or just helping support, non-government, grassroots, climber, skier, snowmobiler supported efforts at Avalanche Information. And check out the group on Facebook too. Okay, bye.